I'm going to begin by mentioning dailydevotions.org, dailydevotions.org. It's the 501c3 nonprofit for whom I work. We broadcast on 2 NBC television stations daily in Maine, reaching about 100,000 people. I'm a brief storyteller. I write 270-word spiritual stories that broadcast during the morning news. We are unique. We are the last standing and the very first religious broadcast in the United States, and I'm the 5th minister to hold this position. I was recruited from the Congregational Church of Boothbay Harbor, Maine, where I had been pastor for 11 years. dailydevotions.org. And they are videos, and they come in text, and we also produce a radio program as well. I'm here today because of what happened to me in 1980. I kept it a secret for 20 years. And before I go too far, I'd like to ask, are there other near-death experiencers here today? There's one in the back, there's 2, there's 3. Near-death experiencers are aliens. Once you cross to the other side and come back, the world is never the same as it was before. I'd like to talk to you initially about what happened to me, and then I'd like to go back in time a little bit to what I was like as a child, and then come forward to talk about the stranger experiences that come in my life as a result of my near-death experience. I was a University of Massachusetts at Amherst English major, as was said, and I wanted to go on exchange. So I arranged to go to Montana State University in Bozeman for 1 year to be an exchange student, and I chose Bozeman so that I could spend time skiing. I was in the National Ski Patrol and got a job in the patrol as a volunteer at Bridger Bowl, which is right outside of Bozeman, famed for its powder snow. And so also I could go backpacking and climbing through the multiple seasons. I'd been a Boy Scout my entire life and had lots of merit badges and spent a lot of time camping every month in every weather. When the opportunity arose in March of 1980 to go back to Boston to see my family or to spend time backpacking, cross-country skiing, or doing some adventure, I chose to go on an adventure. I didn't want to go back home to my family because they were the reason I left. My sister, when I was 14 years old, my sister ran away from home. From my family's point of view, she vanished, and it broke my mother's heart. Gave my mother a breakdown and pretty much wrecked my family. So I left to leave the pain behind. Every night when I was a child, from this time on, my mom would stand in the dining room in the dark, holding the curtain back, and cry as she looked down the road to see if my sister was walking home, which of course she never did. Every night my mother cried herself to sleep, and my sister, other sister Cynthia, and my brother David and I were told never ever to mention my sister or to talk about her ever to anyone, not to my cousins. I grew up outside of Boston in a small city where my dad was a prominent person. We weren't allowed to talk to anyone about it, and never to mention her name in our house, because once we did, my mother would cry. So I left, and I went to Montana. And in that March, I decided not to go home again, and I wanted to do something fun and exciting. And so I been involved in the outdoor club. I'd led trips to the Tetons with the outdoor club as an exchange student. I'd spent a month in Yellowstone and in Glacier National Park, and I was in the mountains as frequently as I possibly could be, backpacking and climbing. So I went to the outdoor club, and on the bulletin, I won't give away it all because most of this is in the book, but I went to the bulletin board and found a tag to rip off, and it said, "My name is Tim, and I'm going to spend 10 days snow caving and ice climbing in Alberta and British Columbia. March vacation." I had never ice climbed. I'd done a fair amount of technical climbing, and I was a bit of a mountain goat. And I'd been snow caving before, which is basically backpacking and sleeping in snow caves that you dig yourself. So that was not unique. It's just really fun for me. So I know. You're like, what? That's crazy. I like the winter. I'm a winter person. I'm from Maine, for crying out loud. I had an opportunity to move to Hawaii a long time ago, and as much as I love the tropical weather, I love to ski, and I love the outdoors. So in any case, I went off with Tim, my new partner, for this trip. We got to know each other a little bit ahead of time, and we did all our planning, and we went out for 8 days in the wilderness of Mount Assiniboine Provincial Park, which is in British Columbia, just on the other side of the Alberta border, south of Jasper and north of Banff, if anybody's familiar with that part of the world. We had a great time. We were culminating our trip with a one-day ice climb at this world-famous climb called Lower Weeping Wall. And as I mentioned, I'd never been an ice climber before. Tim was a lead rock climber and a lead ice climber, so that gave me a level of confidence that I was in good hands. By the end of our 8-day or 10-day snow caving trip, I trusted him with my life, and he trusted me with his life. So we had become very close. We got to the climb that morning, and there were other teams climbing that day. We began our climb, and I had made a choice, and I had talked Tim into my choice. I was 21 years old, and I believed in my own immortality, and I didn't have all the right equipment. In people who are backpacking and climbing, outdoors people, there's a basic saying, and the saying is, there's no bad weather, there's only bad equipment. And I made a poor equipment choice. I knew that I had made this choice. Tim knew that I had made this choice. You need 2 ice axes to climb with. I only had one. And in this hand, I had an ice hammer, which is appreciably smaller and not used to actually climb. You can use it to climb, but it's not a climbing tool. It's a tool to place ice screws in the ice, to chip ice with, and it usually dangles off your hip where you can grab it and use it. I had 2 of these. I had one down here and one up here and one over here, which was my ice axe. I should have had an ice axe over here too, but I didn't. So this reason caused our climb to be significantly slower than everybody else's climb, which meant that we reached the top of the climb much later than everybody else. The reason why it was slow is because with an ice axe, you can place the axe, tip into the ice, tip the point in, so you've got this hypotenuse and a 90-degree angle, and then you can let go, because halfway up the shaft is a nylon tube, a soft cloth that has an O-ring on it, and or a bead, and you can slide. You put your hand through this tube, you slide the bead down, you place your axe, you can let go and dangle on this thing. It's very secure. But on a hammer, I know it doesn't sound like it is, but it is. So in football, 100% of the people get hurt. Everybody gets hurt in football. In ice climbing, a very few people get hurt. Just letting you know, it's not as crazy and dangerous as it sounds. It takes a lot of mental focus, which is why I liked it. You have to put your placement of your mind and your body right where you are. You can't think about how high you are up. You can't think about what's above you. You have to be right exactly present. It's very meditative in that way. High level of focus. But the hammer had the same kind of nylon tube on it, but the nylon cloth, but it was on the very bottom of the hammer. So when you place your hammer in, you can't dangle on it. You can't let go of it, because once you let go of it and you dangle on the strap, it pulls away. So you have to hang on to it, which meant that I burned out the muscles in my arm really rapidly, because you have to place the axe and then you rest, and then you place the axe and then you rest, and that's the way it goes. It's very rhythmic. But with a hammer, you place it and you've got to grip, and if you don't grip, then you don't go up. So our climb was significantly slower. We got to the top of the climb, which was about 500 feet of ice. And let me give you a little placement here. It's not far from the highway. It's maybe 70 yards from the Ice Palisades Parkway. And there's a parking lot across the street. And like I said, it's world famous. People, lots of climbers there that day. We got to the top of the climb, which was not the top of the ridge, but the top of the climb. And the sun was going down. We were really late getting to that place because of my choice, my mistake. And as we were sitting on this ledge with our legs dangled over the side, we could see the other teams, the last couple of teams, leaving. And we were alone. We watched them pack out and leave. And now we were by ourselves. And this is in the days before super high-tech warm gear. I had a one layer of polypropylene on, which was brand new at the time, but mostly I was wearing wool and some waterproof material from LL Bean that I had to spray to make it waterproof. We were soaked to the skin. We had eaten all of our food. We had drunk all of our water. This was a day climb, so we didn't carry up our stove. We didn't carry up our sleeping bags. We didn't carry up any extra gear because nobody did, because it was a day climb. But we got to the top of this ledge. The sun was setting. We were really already cold. And by the time that we finished pulling up the rope, we had the first stages of hypothermia. Began to set into us very early. The sun set. The stars came out, 1 million stars overhead. And there was enough starlight that we could see in black and white. But we knew that we were in trouble. And Tim pulled up the rope very quickly. It's a 300-foot rope, and you use it doubled so that it's a double line. He pulled it up, and it became a 300-foot knot because in his anxiety, he didn't lay the line the way you're supposed to lay the line. And I began to have to untangle the knot. I'm good with untangling knots. So, which is handy sailing. But to do that, I had to take off my gloves, right? So I still have all my digits, but I have frostbite on all of my digits, my toes, my feet, my fingers, my nose, my cheeks, my ears. I wear gloves when the temperature gets 50 degrees or below, I'm sorry. I ski, but I have electric heaters in my boot, both of them. I have to be very careful with my extremities. A couple of weeks ago, one of my electric batteries fell off my boot, and I got frostbite again, and my big toe, and it's only now can I feel most of my big toe again. So I'm not sure what that's going to bring for next year's ski season. I haven't told my wife yet. Yeah, she's going to find out sometime. So we get to the top of this climb. We pulled up the rope, and hypothermia began to set in. And as I mentioned, I'd been in the ski patrol, so I was very familiar with rescuing people with hypothermia because I'd done it a bunch of times. So we ended up getting shivers, which is a very early stage of hypothermia. It's the body. If you get, you know how you get cold and your body starts to shiver? That's your body actually trying to keep itself warm. It's making itself move so that you can generate some energy, so you can generate some heat. And we ended up with a clattering jaw. And if you ever see in the cartoons, they get the clattering jaw. Well, that's a real thing. And it makes it very difficult to speak, and you can't stop it, and you can't control it. And by the time I got the rope untangled, we were both of us were clattering jaw cold. And we discussed spending the night on the cliff and decided that it was going to kill us if we did. We knew that there was no way we were going to get warm. And what you do in a circumstance like that is we had two choices. We talked about cuddling up together up against the face of the cliff and trying to stay warm, which we figured was going to kill us. Or we could try to push on through to try to save our own lives by continuing to move. That's what we decided to do. So we tied ourselves off to each other because it was dark, even though we could see in black and white. It was still dark out, and we had to traverse over to the first rappel. And we decided at that point not to speak to each other because we realized that every time we talked, we felt our energy level decrease markedly. We could feel our energy going down, and we needed to conserve our strength for movement and not to communicate only as necessary. So we traversed over to the first rappel, and we made our Second major mistake of the evening. Third altogether, but second since we made our top of our climb. We chose not to take a piece of nylon webbing and wrap it around this tree and run the rope through it in order to pull the rope very easily through it once we had reached the bottom, because webbing was expensive and we were cheap college students. And we knew that if we used a piece of webbing, we were going to lose it. So we decided not to do that. Remembering, of course, that we were beginning to lose our mental capacities. So we did that. We wrapped the rope around the tree instead of using the webbing, and we descended. And it was an inclined slope. So we rappelled over the edge into empty space and slid down. We got to the next area, which is about the size of this stage, more or less. And the snow was about this deep, knee deep. We tried to pull the rope free, and the rope had frozen to the tree. And so now 150 feet up above us is where the rope was stuck. And we couldn't, with all our weight pulling together on one side of the rope, could not break the rope free. So Tim knew these particular kind of knots called Persig knots, which are hitches. There are bends, knots, and hitches in rope world, rope land. And a hitch, this particular kind of hitch, you could tie it around a piece of rope and you could slide it up, but as soon as you put pressure on it, it friction locked in place. So it was an ascending hitch. And so Tim knew this Persig knot, which I did not, and he tied one on this side of the rope and one on this side of the rope with these big long loops. And I took our climbing line and I wrapped it around my waist and I rolled into the snow on my side, trying to make the rope, the double line, as taut as possible, because Tim began to ascend back up with no safety protection because we were going to die. And there was the only one choice, was to go back up to get the rope. And because it was an overhang, you couldn't climb this. You had to ascend back up. So I made the rope as taut as possible, and Tim began his ascent up, and he probably got 20 feet up, and his motion and his weight freed the ice from the rope, and he fell down. And I kind of rolled out of the way. He yelled out, "Falling!" which usually means ice or rock, falling is when you're actually falling, and the other person is supposed to put you into a lock belay, like you lock the rope so that they don't fall very far, but there was no way to do that. So he yelled out, "Falling," and I rolled out of the way. He sort of landed on top of me, but there was deep snow, and he was unhurt. We pulled down the rope, but at this point, we began to get to the place in hypothermia where you begin to lose your coordination. So we were now stumbling around. Our thinking was as uncoordinated as our physical bodies, and our speech was impeded because our faces were freezing. So it was very difficult to talk. And about this time, a car drove south on the Palisades Parkway. And so we flag and waving, and they drove right by. So we were trying to get our gear together, and we watched another vehicle come down the highway, and it pulled into the parking lot across the street, turned, and flashed its lights. And we jumped up and down, and we waved, and flashed its lights, and we realized that it was the park ranger, because we had spent the night before in his cabin, and we made a deal with him. And the deal was, "We'll cook you dinner if you let us stay here." So he said yes. So we cooked him dinner, and he let us spend the night there. And in the morning, before our climb, we signed into the wilderness book, because whenever you go into a wilderness area anywhere, at least in North America, you sign into a book telling the ranger where you are, what your destination is, and when you're coming out, so that if they need to rescue you, they know where to look for you. So we had signed into the book that it was a one-day climb at Lower Weeping Wall, and when we did not come back out to sign out, he did the responsible thing, which is to come and find us. So he sat in the parking lot. We jumped up and down. He flashed his lights. We knew that he knew that we were there. We were heartened, but we still were in trouble. We traversed over to the second rappel, which was a darkened crag. And by about this time, the moon had risen. It was about a 3/4 moon, and the moon had illuminated enough of the terrain to make it almost in color, so we could see very well. And we traversed over to this next rappel, and this rappel was in a like a darkened shadow place, because the moon was over here. There's a little bit of a turn in the mountain and a bunch of boulders and crags in here. And so we rappelled down in this shadowy place. We came around to this little ledge. It was a fairly easy rappel. And we clipped our harnesses in to the rock face. So now we're off of the ice, we're on the rock, and there's a flat wall about this far from me, and I'm standing on a ledge maybe about 12 to 16 inches wide, with empty space before me and the mountain in front of me, with an iron pin and an iron ring pounded into the mountain, into which I clipped my harness. And Tim was to my left, and the mountain turned like this, and the rope went up around the corner. So I tied off one end of the rope to my harness, and I dropped the other end, and I began to pull. And on the very first pull, the rope stuck up around the corner. And now we're in it, and at this point, the ranger flashes his lights, and he drives off. Because now we're only one rappel away from the bottom, and all our gear, our tent and our stoves and our sleeping bags, but now the rope is stuck. And now our hypothermia is advanced. Our coordination is at a very low level, and in short time, I get hot. And now I'm not really paying attention to Tim whatsoever. Tim's in his own trouble, and I'm in my trouble, and I'm trying to pull on the rope. But I began to, take off layers of clothes because I was hot, because that's what happens. And it's the body. Part of what happens is all the blood rushes into the core in order to keep the essential organs alive. It's willing to lose an arm to keep the heart going. We talked a little bit. Tim knew that the rope was stuck, and I discussed with him untying the line from my harness and handing him it's called the bitter end. The end of a rope is called the bitter end. And handing him the bitter end so that together we could pull on this line. But we were fearful, given that our hands were frozen, that he would drop the line. And if he dropped the line, there was no chance. We were then definitely going to die, because there's no way to get out of the situation we were in. He couldn't reach over. I was about that far away. He couldn't reach the line when it was tied to me. If I untied it, there was enough line for him to grab it, but tied to me, there wasn't. So we decided to leave it tied to my harness, and my job was to try to pull it. When I began to get hot, I began to think that with the rope stuck, that this was it. We were not going to get out of the situation. I remember looking out, the Columbia ice fields were off to this direction, and I could see them because they were far away, but I could see them because the moonlight was on them, and there was so much beauty. It was just incredibly beautiful. The stars overhead had 100 different colors, and I could see every star individually, blues and oranges and greens and yellows, and I could see the great beauty of the ice fields, and it was just an incredibly beautiful place to die. And that's what I began to tell myself. I'm going to die here. And so I started praying, and I started thinking about my family, and I started thinking about God and life and death, and I relaxed into it. I relaxed into knowing that I was not going to make it. And I had spent all night driving with my willpower towards survival, and I had used up all of my excess of energy. My body was beginning to consume its muscle structure because I'd used up all of my minimal fat at that point of my life, and I recognized that there was nothing that I could do, and then I began to fall asleep. And I had a helmet on, but when I would fall asleep, I couldn't stop myself from falling asleep. I'd fall asleep and I'd fall off this little ledge. But I was harnessed in, fall off the ledge, smack into the mountain, wake up because I smacked into the mountain, pulled myself back up, pull on the rope. And at this point, I wasn't paying attention to Tim at all. I still don't know what condition he was in and what was going on with him, because my whole world was now focused interiorly, trying to get the rope free. I don't know how many times that happened, but I know that at one point I pulled myself back up, And as I stood there trying to pull on the rope, I watched my peripheral vision come in on me. And outside this little line here was darkness. And it was like a circle. It was like the end of an old movie where it fades to black. And I watched this fade to black come in. And I remember thinking, what's going on? What am I seeing or not seeing? And I watched it, and I felt myself fall. And I thought to myself, I must be falling asleep again. But then I was awake still. I still had consciousness, and I didn't feel myself hit the mountain. And I thought, what is this strange thing? And then in front of my vision, it opened up into a vastness in which there was from this point on, and I'm sure the near-death people will agree with me, that there are no words to describe what I'm about to say. And so I spent my entire life trying to find a way to think about what had happened and form language to give it some sort of structure to process it. Words are symbols of concepts. And when you get to the near-death experience place, there are no concepts because there are no things. And there is no time and there is no space. And so I saw what I describe as like an energy field, a cloud, a being that had intention. And it filled my entire vision, and it rushed toward me, and it communicated to me, I'm taking you. And I took all of my willpower that I had used to survive that night. I had dug this really deep channel of self-will and survival, a kind of a mammalian, I'm going to not die drive. And I put it up as a barrier to this intention to take me, but it took me like a football team running through a piece of paper, just plucked me right out. And I had no choice, no matter what I resisted with. And the next thing I knew, I was in this vastness, this described in some literature as the outer darkness, but it was completely illuminated, but there was no light. And I had no body, but I had being. And there was no time and no space and no thing. I had no brain. I had no language, no culture, no heartbeat. But I could think better than I'd ever thought before, as if my brain was no longer in the way of my thinking. And I was in this vast emptiness that extended into infinity in every direction, and I could see in every direction all at once. And like I said, it was darkness, but it was illuminated because I could see in every direction. And in front of me was, if I had a front, was a shimmering door. And it was transparent and translucent. And inside this doorway was a tunnel. And it was immense. It was 100 yards wide and 70 yards tall. Just immense. But remember, everything I say happens in timelessness, so there's no order of events for me, and there's no language to communicate it. But I touched this thing with my being, and I felt it was living. It was like the living God was in it. And as I did that, I heard my name called from deep inside of me. And I knew instantaneously that I was in the presence of God, but not God like I'd ever conceived of before. And it was a voice, but it had no gender, and it had no sound, and it had no language, but it communicated to me directly in the depth of my being. And when my name was called, I knew that God was absolutely present to me, next to me, but I could see everything, but not God. And the voice called my name, and it was the name of my creation. It was the name given to me to make me exist. It wasn't just Peter, it was the ground of my being, as Paul Tillich said. The ground and the essence of my being. And I was infilled with beauty and love and hope and truth and life and joy, but it was all one thing. But also simultaneously to that infilling and knowing that I was in the presence of God, all of my experiences rushed up too. And all of the pain that I'd caused everyone in my entire life came with it. And God said to me, I know everything about you, and there is nothing hidden. And in that knowing that I was known, I experienced a life review of all the people that I had hurt in my life. I experienced all of the pain that I'd ever given to every single person of my entire life. I didn't look at their pain. I lived their pain. And it was the pain that I gave them intentionally and the pain that I didn't even know that I had given them. And I remember that my sister Cynthia, who had not run away, was prominent in this, because Cynthia was very close to me in age, and Andrea was older than me. And so Cynthia and we tussled a lot. And I caused her an immense amount of pain. And I describe it now as hell, because it was so much suffering. I suffered so much suffering that I had given away, intentionally and unintentionally. And I judged myself as guilty and shameful. And it was everything that I'd ever done from the moment of my birth to intend and not intend to hurt. And I conceive, because I'm a Christian minister, I conceive of that as sin now. The pain that I gave to people. And meanwhile, as I was going through this experience of self-judgment, the voice was saying to me, I know you. I've always known you. You are my creature. I made you. I make you. I love you as you are. I have always loved you. I loved you into being. I love you with all the pain you caused, and I love you without it. I love all of you. And none of this is a surprise to me. I know this about you already. And because I felt shame at my actions, in comparison with the infinity of love, I judged myself guilty, and I was forgiven. Jesus talks about the kernel and the chaff gets burned off in the fire, sort of like that. And then all of the pain was gone, and I was left with only love and beauty and joy and truth and hope and compassion, all one thing. And I got to bring with me into heaven all of the love that I'd ever given away and all of the love that was ever given to me. And that was the treasure of myself. And I said to the voice, am I dead? And the voice said, yes, you're dead. And I said, well, I can't die now. And the voice said, why? And I said, well, because of my sister and my parents. If I take another child from my parents, they will suffer. So God swept me and showed me all of earth. And in showing me all of earth, I saw that the length of my life was the wink of an eye. And timelessness, time has no meaning. And I saw every human being on earth individualized. And I saw them loved in the same way that I was loved in heaven. And God said to me, in the way that I love you now, you know that I've always loved you. And it was self-evident to me that God's love is the size of the cosmos, the billions and billions of years that the universe has existed. And the greatest love I'd ever experienced in my life was a speck of dust in comparison. The immensity and infinite love of God is unbelievably overwhelming. And that's the love I'd always been loved with. And I knew that to be true. And I knew that every single human being was loved in the same way. But the difference between the human beings and me was that they couldn't see. They were still in the world with a veil, not knowing the immensity of love. Couldn't know it. Not built into the structure, but still loved nonetheless. And God showed me my parents in particular. And I could see their faces and I could see their suffering. And God said to me, all will be well with them, because all has always been well, and all will be well, and all is well, because I love them. And you know this to be true, and I knew it to be true, that in the end my parents would no longer suffer, because in death they would be immersed in the ocean of love. But I couldn't look at their faces, and know that they would suffer more with me gone. And I knew, without my brain, I knew so much more about what living and loving and life was. I understood completely that in the end, they would be well. And I said, I can't go yet. I have another reason. I was in a theater company, which is the first time I was in Orange County. I was traveling in a theater company from Montana State University in a sign language theater as a mime. And I was in this theater company. We'd been in rehearsal for the whole year, and we were going on a 24,000-mile, 64-show tour of 14 Western states. And the director, before we had gone on this trip, had literally grabbed me by the collar and told me not to get hurt because there were no understudies. And I had a responsibility. I had a responsibility to my castmates and to the company, and I would not be fulfilling my duty. And I told God this, and God said, okay. And I said, well, do I have to stay here? And God said, no, you don't have to stay here. And I said, well, if I go back, can I come back here to heaven, to this joy and this beauty and this immense love? And God said, yes, you can come back here. And I said, well, then I choose to live my life. And God said, you won't live your life. And the next thing I knew, I was screwed back into my body painfully. And I swam up to consciousness, and I didn't know what this thing was. And I didn't know who I was or what I was or where I was or anything. I was in an utter state of confusion. And as I swam up, the first thing I began to hear was screaming. And it took me a while to figure it out. And it was Tim. He had me by the shoulder, and he was screaming at me, don't die. And as I kind of came to, he said, I thought you were dead. You were dead. I didn't even know what that meant. And he helped me up. And I know he was talking to me, and it took me a long time to figure out language. And he kept saying, I thought you were dead. You were dead. And he said, pull the rope. And I pulled the rope, and it came free on the first pull. And we descended, and because we were close to the car, we went and we got our gear, and we set up our tent, which had a chimney and a vent, an unusual tent, which meant that you could fire up the stove inside the tent and not get asphyxiated because it blew a draft. We heated up some tea. We treated ourselves a little bit for hypothermia. As we began to come to our senses, we realized that our best chance of survival was not in the tent, but in the car with the heater. So we went and we got the car, which is right across the street, and as we were throwing our gear in the car, the sun had come up, and the ranger showed up. And the ranger showed up, and he got out of his truck, and he said, were you the guys on the mountain last night? And we said, yes, sir, we were. He said, well, I was coming to see if we had to get your bodies with the helicopter. And off we went. The story goes on from there. As bad as that night was, the next night was worse. And I won't tell you what that is because it's in the book, but it was a terrible, terrible thing that happened the next night. I didn't die the next night, but I could have. On the following morning, Tim and I had to split up. We were still in Canada. We no longer had a car. And we only had a certain amount of money. Most of our money had been spent. And we had enough money for one bus ticket. And so Tim took the bus with our skis, and I hitchhiked. I'd hitchhiked all over the country in my life. And I took some of the gear. And I remember standing out on the highway, looking at the sunrise, wondering what had happened to me. Not understanding at all what I was as a human being. And now the world seemed to me to be a cartoon, two-dimensional and ugly. And I was in this beautiful place with this beautiful sunrise, and to me, there was no aesthetic value to it at all. I made my way back to Bozeman. I got into the theater troupe again, and we did this tour. We had a 15-passenger van that I was supposed to drive or ride in, and a pickup truck that I was supposed to drive or ride in, depending on my job. I refused to drive. I refused to go in the van. I took my winter gear, and I spent the entire tour in the back of the pickup truck alone. Once in a while, some of my friends from the company would join me, but I needed to be alone. And so I saw all of the United States on the upside from the back of the pickup truck. But from the downside, I was completely lost. And I decided, because I didn't understand what happened to me, that I would tell no one. And as I began to understand that something profound had happened, I realized how crazy it would be to talk about it. So I promised myself never to speak of it. And so I began to keep a secret for 20 years. I eventually, long story short, came out of the closet to my congregation as a result of an embezzlement that had lasted 10 years in the congregation, hundreds of thousands of dollars, terrible, terrible treatment of me and my family, accusations. People tried to destroy my career, tried to destroy me. I wasn't guilty. We caught the perpetrator. And then one Sunday morning, as the church began to heal, someone said to me, "Peter," I'm in the pulpit, I'm climbing up into the pulpit before church, and "Peter, we've been talking. We don't understand how you possibly could have survived these years with us the way we treated you. You must have great faith." And I thought to myself, I don't have any faith. I don't have any belief. I don't believe in God. I have no faith in God. I've got to tell them the truth so that they understand why I was able to do this. One of the things that happened to me when I died is God took belief from me. I was raised Roman Catholic and Greek Orthodox. My dad's GO, my mom's RC. The churches were a block apart. They've hated each other for 1,000 years. They hated each other in my city. Sure, the Greeks and the Irish kind of hung out a little bit, but theologically, enemies. One church would talk down one church would talk down the other. I went to both churches. The oldest Greek boy, I went with my dad. The good Irish Catholic mother, I went to CCD. I was exposed to both sides, and I came to the conclusion rather early that either they both had the truth to some extent or neither did. And I landed in the both had the truth to some extent place. I was a believer. I was a member in college of a charismatic Catholic church movement. I'd been slain in the Spirit, for those of you who are Pentecostal born-agains. I'd been slain in the Spirit. I'd been born again. But all of that was gone now. Because to me, this is the illusion now. And only God is real. And I don't need to believe, and I can't believe. The part of me that could believe before, so imagine me as a capacitor, as a motherboard, and I have a capacitor, and the capacitor is belief. That capacitor was taken from me, and the holes where it was plugged in, the holes are gone too. To me, only God is real. And this is the place of passage and illusion. It's not the real thing. The only real thing here is love. That's the treasure you keep when you get to go. That's what you get to bring with you. So I told my congregation that day. I had told my wife on the night before we got married, which was completely unfair to her, but I hadn't told anyone. I couldn't tell anyone. I came out to my congregation and to stunned silence, because the contradiction of me obviously being a person of belief, of deep belief, and me saying that I'm not, was very difficult for them. But that's my reality. I found out that it was called near-death experience when I was at Yale, because my wife was an epidemiologist working in the medical school, and she came across a book called Life After Life by Raymond Moody, which I'm sure most of you know. and she brought it to me, and she said, "Peter, I think this is you." I didn't go to architecture school. I was an English major, but I was going into architecture because of the family business. My dad was, until he had his heart attack at 56, he was next in line to be the president of the National Association of Architects. And he had his heart attack, and that ended. I had been working in the construction trades, pounding a hammer for quite a number of years so that I could work with blue-collar guys when I was an architect, because I don't know if you know this, but blue-collar guys, they hate architects, generally speaking, and they don't get along. And so I was going to kind of like be the liaison between the two, go to grad school, get my degree, work with my dad. All of that went away. And I instead went to divinity school. So I didn't go into the monastery, because that was the other choice for me as a result of this, because I'd been associated with this monastery through my Catholic prep school, where I'd learned to meditate when I was in high school, because the monks actually had an understanding of spirituality. So I went to divinity school to avoid the monastery for a period of time and to study the history of mysticism, not crystals, not New Ageism, but the practice of contemplation and the unitive experience of the actual mystics that are recorded through history. Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, Julian of Norwich, Richard Rolle, John Rusbrook. There's a huge, long history. Rumi probably is the most famous of all, the Sufi Rumi, the most read poet in America. I went to divinity school to try to find a language to think about this. It's changed my entire life. It's changed the course of my living. It's the only thing that matters to me. I feel bad for my wife because she's not number one in my life. She's not. Only God is. It's this tremendous attraction that's irrepressible, and I did my best to run away. I did my best not to do this, but I had no choice. Even not speaking about it for 20 years, there was a rumble and a roar inside of me all the time. On the tip of my tongue, every day, I put a block so as not to speak about it. Because I'm basically a rational empiricist, despite my Christian upbringing. I like things that are measurable. I love science, because science doesn't ask you if you believe in science. It is what it is. And if new information comes, then that's added to it. It doesn't matter what I believe about it. I'm kind of wired that way. So I'm not a believer. I'm an experiencer. How am I doing on time? I want a time check. I have 5 minutes. So I want to talk to you about some of the impacts. I thought it was important to tell you the causation. So I made a list. I suppose the first thing that I should tell you is the most obvious one in my family life. I, for a long period of time, would block the radio signal 90.1 FM. And that's the radio signal that is our local public radio broadcaster in Maine. And in our kitchen, I listen to NPR all the time when I cook. It's what I do. I cook, I clean, I listen to NPR. There was about a year and a half where when I was in the kitchen, there was no reception for NPR. And I would stand in certain places in the kitchen and block the signal. And at first, I couldn't understand what was going on, so I brought my kids in on it. And they would stand in the place, and the signal would be present. I would stand in the place, and there would be no signal. So we brought their friends in because it was kind of crazy. I blocked the signal for about a year and a half. I work in television. I wear a lavalier microphone, which is a wireless mic, for another period of time, at another period of time. When I have the lavalier mic on, all they get is static in the production room. If I take the lavalier off and I put it on the floor, they get reception. They take the lavalier mic, they put it on anybody else, the production crew, to experiment, total reception. Bring the lavalier mic near me, no reception. I can't wear watches because watches last weeks on me. They stop working. I got hit by a bolt of lightning. Hit me in the thigh, came out my shoulder. I remember thinking, God, I wonder if I should put up the roof on the car. And I watched the bolt of lightning come out, hit the back seat of my Volkswagen, top down, in my thigh and out my shoulder. Didn't kill me, didn't feel anything. That was about a year later. People have spirit animals. If I have a spirit animal, it's the black-capped chickadee. Black-capped chickadees land on me on a regular basis. And most of them aren't my friends. They just like me. The first time that happened, I was at the monastery on retreat, having been taken from outside myself and my yoga practice and brought into the presence of the divine, seeing myself in comparison to infinity and seeing myself as the ugliest thing in creation. Worm and no man. In comparison to beauty, I am nothing. So I went to the monastery to talk to my spiritual advisor, Theophane Boyd. And as I was out on this meditative silent walk, a chickadee came up and landed on a branch. I raised my hand. It landed on my finger. I looked into its eyes, and I saw the spark of light within it, and I could see that it saw that within me. And I began my relationship with chickadees. I get taken outside of myself. For most of my life, I've been praying for my death. Since I came back, biggest mistake I made, I feel, was coming back. I'll talk a little bit more about that after, but I'll tell you one significant experience. About 7 years ago, I'm kind of an ethereal person. I'm not really well grounded here. Most of me is still on the other side. My orientation, I have one eye over there all the time, and one eye here, 1 foot there, 1 foot here. I live between. But it leaves me in a very difficult place for my family. So our local public television station every year did an auction to raise money. And because I'm a television personality in my state, I got invited to be an auctioneer. So year after year, I was on auction at the television station for PBS. And it was always at night. And in order to be really, on, I had to drink a lot of coffee. So I drank about 7 or 8 cups of coffee this night, which is, I know, it's way more than I normally drink, but it was on till 11:30 at night. I go to bed at 9. So I had to get totally jazzed. And so the night ends, I drive back an hour and a half to my house. I go to bed, but I can't sleep. I got too much coffee. So it's Sunday morning, we get up, the kids got to do homework. So I get up with the kids, my wife gets up, but to help them with the homework, I've got to take a little more coffee, so I drink a little more coffee so I could be cognizant. But now I can't sleep, I'm exhausted. I go lay down on my sofa in the sunroom. The kids are still doing their homework. My wife is in there helping them now because I was not able to really think because I was exhausted and jazzed. But I lay down on the sofa to rest, but I can't sleep. So what do? I don't know. I'll meditate. So I began to meditate. I've been meditating since 1977. And so I began my practice of meditation, and instantly I am plucked out of myself, and I'm brought into this place of sound. This is the third time I've seen the light. And the closest I've ever come to the light. And I'm brought into this universe of music, and I am a sphere of music. I'm a sphere of sound. The most beautiful sound I've ever heard surrounds me, and I am it. And I raise up inside this sound toward the light. And when I see the light, I say inside myself, light! And instantly I'm back in my body again. And then I begin to pulse between this world and that world. And it lasts about 3 hours. And when I'm back in this world again, I'm on the sofa. My dog, a poodle at the time, poodle comes in and looks at me, and I see the poodle, and then I'm taken out again. And then I see my wife in the doorway, and I'm taken out again. And it lasts, like I said, about 3 hours. I finally, at the end of it all, I'm in the living room, in the sunroom, and I sit up, and my wife comes and stands in the doorway, and then once again, I don't know who I am. I don't know what this is. I don't know where I am, because all for me exists is the light and the music of the spheres. I don't know what else to call it. The angelic chorus. And my wife says to me, "Your name is Peter Panagore. I am your wife, and you are in your home." And I stand up, and I'm not sure how to walk or move. But for the next 6 months, I have like a hole inside of me on both sides, and through me channels a peace like I had never known. It just flows right through me, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I became more integrated here than I'd ever been before. And there's the music now. I became more integrated here than I'd ever been before. And for the first time in my life since 1980, I was comfortable with being alive. Shortly thereafter, I play softball. I played second base for a long time. Sunday morning game. It's time. I'll end with saying that despite the fact that I blew my ankle apart, tore my tibia from my fibula, dislocated my ankle sliding into second base when a foot got stuck under the base and the base didn't move, the peace continued even when I was in pain for 14 weeks. The peace eventually went away. It took about 8 months. It dissipated, but it left me integrated so I could be here and not just want to go. When I was 6 years old, long before this ever happened, I was in my front yard. I grew up outside of Boston in a small city of Marlborough, for those of you who are from the East Coast. And we had a maple tree in my front yard, and it was my tree. It's the tree I climbed. And one day I was in the tree when I was 6. We had just moved into the house the year before. And I heard the voice of God speak to me and say to me, "You are mine. You belong to me. You're going to work for me." So I climbed down from the tree. I went into the house, and my mom, who was working at home ironing clothes, and my dad was working outside the house. I told my mom that God had just spoken to me and told me that I belonged to God and that I would work for her, for him, her. And God said to me, and my mom said to me, "Well, in that case, you're going to be a priest. In that case, you need to learn to iron and sew and cook and clean." And so I did. My mom taught me to iron. We began that day, and taught me to sew. And because she figured that this is 1965 or something, so she figured I would not be married, wouldn't have a wife to care for me. My wife doesn't know how to sew. I'm just saying. And I tend to be the house cleaner. But that's when it all kind of really started for me. The near-death experience exacerbated it. When I was, what I'm going to talk about now are the crazy things. And they began before my near-death experience, and they got worse or better after. And I'd like to say that if you're pining to have a near-death experience and you want to experience this, I would say don't. This is not what you want. It may seem like a blessing, but it's often a curse as it is a blessing. It leaves one disassociated. It leaves one depressed. I went through a long period of depression. I live a life in non-attachment, not detachment, but non-attachment. My connectivity is to the other side, not so much here. So when I was young, I was around the same age, at 6 or so. My brother had been born, and we had shared a room. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and I sat up in my bed, only my body stayed lying down. And I looked over my shoulder, and I saw myself lying down. And I stood up, and everything was kind of sepia tone. And I had my door open because I didn't like to sleep in the dark. Made my parents leave the door open a crack. And I passed through the door, down the stairs. And as I went down the stairs, and this is the first time I'm telling this publicly because it's kind of kooky. There was a landing in our stairs. It turned, and on the landing was a little baby elephant. And the little baby elephant was all dressed in Indian garb, and the elephant had human eyes. And the elephant looked at me with an immense amount of love, and it pointed its trunk down the stairs and out the door. I felt loved and trusting, and so I went down the stairs, and I floated, and I passed through the door, out into the front yard, down the concrete steps, into the road. And I looked up, and I saw the universe in its immensity and its infinity, and I became frightened, and I was back in my body again. I think that there are people who have a tendency toward mathematical genius or musical talent, and they're just born that way. They pick up a guitar. My son picks up, he play the guitar, he can play the trumpet, he plays the piano. It doesn't really matter. He can play any instrument. He doesn't really work at it. He just can do it. I think that there are spiritual people who are born that way. I seem to be one of those people before this near-death ever happened. When I was a sophomore in college, a year before my junior year in Montana, I was backpacking for 8 days on the Appalachian Trail with a guy named Bob, who's still my friend, who's also an atheist, as was Tim. Many of my friends, as it turns out, are atheists. Don't know why, they just are. Except for my divinity school friends, but among them there are atheists as well. So I was on the Appalachian Trail, and we were in Massachusetts. There's about 8 inches of snow on the ground. We were out for a week during spring break, and we were staying this particular night in a half cabin, which meant it's a 3-sided cabin with an open front and a fire pit. And no one else was on the trail in this time of year, so we were by ourselves for a week, which was fabulous. And this particular night, I fell asleep with Bob next to me in a sleeping bag. I'm in my own, and immediately upon falling asleep, I was plucked out of myself, and I was brought into a heaven. And in this heaven, I had my body, and I couldn't see very far. I knew that I was sleeping. I knew that I wasn't in my body. I didn't know what was going on. And I was bidden to raise my hands, and a hand appeared in front of me, and this hand had a gold vial, a glass vial filled with gold dust. And the hands untwirled it and poured it into my palms, into a pile, and the voice without sound said to me, "I give you this," and a breath blew, and it all vanished, and it said, "Now give it away." And I woke up. I thought, what was this? I stayed awake for a while. I fell back asleep. I was immediately plucked out again into the same space, only this time I was standing in a column of fire. And the fire was below me and above me and consumed me, and I was frightened because I was on fire. The fire was inside of me and around me, and the voice said to me, "You will not be consumed." I woke up. I tried to talk to Bob about it. Bob said, "Pfft." He's still my friend, by the way. He lives in Texas. He accepts me as I am. That was the beginning of all of it. I've spent a lot of time pondering over those particular vision dreams in relationship to the near-death experience. And my greatest fear of being a near-death survivor is that I would be consumed by God. And I fought against it for a long time because it seemed to me that God would consume my whole being and I would no longer be myself. And so I put up as many barriers as I could while I dashed into it. I live in this place of contradiction. The thing that I fear the most is the thing that attracts me the most. And the fear of God. I'm not afraid of God, but God is so A-W-E. I am in such awe of God that I am overwhelmed by the presence and the love that makes me see myself as nothing. A good example of that is that I was a pastor before I was in Booth Bay Harbor, which is where I live in Maine, on a little island not far from Mount Desert Island, where Acadia National Park is. There's a bay south of there. I was on an island south of there as the pastor. And it was a resort town. There were lots of extremely rich people there, but many, many, many poor people. They landed the most lobster on this island in the state of Maine a couple of years running. Very working class. I could have drinks on the yacht with the vice president of Mobil, and I would go down, because the guys liked me, have a shot of whiskey with the fishermen on the boat who didn't graduate 8th grade. And the fishermen couldn't ever really understand why I treated them the same way I treated the vice president. Because to me, as a result of my near-death experience, all humanity is exactly the same, including me. I am a created being. I am no better and no worse than anybody else. So we judge each other this way all the time. But for me, this is the way it is. This is the judgment point. And it's not like I wanted it this way. It just is this way. And I am no thing. I am nothing compared with the immensity of God. And therefore, when I look at another human being, a homeless person, the wealthiest person, the most educated or uneducated, I only see exactly the same thing, that all of us are nothing compared to the immensity of God. And so I live, I guess, a humble life, but it's not one of my own creation. It's one that was given to me. The egalitarianism, the equality of humanity across the globe, all of us being the same. I want to talk a little bit, because someone asked me during the break about Jesus Christ. And why am I a universalist, basically, even though I'm a Trinitarian in a church? I'm really basically a universalist, one God, one love. And it wasn't like I chose that. It was shown to me. God is greater than religion. Religion is an access for us. And when we talk about Jesus, the man, who I adore, I listen to his teachings and I read his teachings. I'm a scholar of the Bible. It's what I did for my profession. But I'm much more interested in the light of Christ. There's a division between the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church 1,000 years ago. What did they fight over? They fought over the divinity of Jesus. The Orthodox land that there's a little more Jesus, a little more Christ in Jesus, and the Catholics landed in a little more Jesus than Christ. We're splitting hairs in terms of the density of it, but that's basically it. I land in the realm of the light of God, manifest in Jesus through the Christ light. But it isn't about Jesus the man. It's about Christ the light. I was blessed to attend a lecture at Boston College. One of my summer neighbors funded a chair. He was taught at New York University School of Medicine, and he paid out of pocket for a chair at Boston College every year for a visiting scholar. He was much older than me, 40 years older than me. He also attended the same monastery, St. Joseph's Abbey, that I attended. And one day he said to me, I want you to go down to BC, and I want you to hear this lecturer. And this guy, the subject was Jesus and the extraterrestrials. It's like, yeah, that sounds great. His thesis is this. So we're on this one planet in a singular star system. We have this idea that we're important. The Bible tells us in Genesis that the earth was a dome, and above the dome were the waters of heaven, and below the dome was earth. The bottom part of it was the earth, and below that were the waters of heaven. And we were the most special thing in all creation. 150 years ago, we learned that there's such a thing as a galaxy. And now we know there are 23 septillion galaxies. And each galaxy contains 23 septillion stars. And each of those stars we now know have planets. And some of those planets we now know are in the Goldilocks zone. Could be habitable, could be life, could be intelligent life. Even in our own star system, we think that it's possible that there's life on Eos, that there might be water on Mars, that we're not alone. So, this professor said, Jesus comes to Earth, a man, a mammal, in a particular time, in a particular place, in a particular culture. Now imagine that there's another planet and another star system, and the asteroid that struck the Yucatan, that killed all the dinosaurs, misses that planet. And that planet, the dinosaurs evolve into sentient beings. And they have cultures, and they wear clothes, and they have languages, and they have babies, and they have wars. If Jesus came to them, would he be a mammal from Jerusalem, speaking Arabic or Aramaic? And the answer, of course, is no. Could the light show to them? The answer is no. Maybe Jesus coming to earth created salvation for the universe, or maybe the light of God manifests itself among other sentient beings in other ways, because the physical world is not the important one. The light of God is the important thing. Who am I to say? I am not omniscient. I only know what I know. I can speculate. I can think. I can read. I don't know the answer to that question. But I do know this, that God is love beyond imagination, and that every single human being is beloved of God, and that all flesh life here has a veil that cannot see that. You experience love inside yourself when you love somebody. You know what it's, for those of you who have lost people, a child, God forbid, or a spouse, you know what that pain is. And the pain is proportional to the amount of love that you shared. That's why we suffer grief. It's like we have a tentacle, and we extend this tentacle into this other being, our husband, our wife, and they extend one back into us, and we share this thing, and then they die, and it gets cut off here, and it gets cut off there, and now you've got a hole here, and this one's dangling with no attachment, and we suffer. But the love is still present, but you experience it as grief. Love is the operative. Every near-death person who goes far enough says the same thing. God is love. All of the great saints and all of the traditions say the same thing. God is love. Now maybe Jesus' death and resurrection, which, by the way, I have absolutely no problem with. Why can't he rise again? Why wouldn't that be possible? Maybe he opened the gate to heaven so that we can see that God is real. And maybe the salvation, like Karl Rahner, the Catholic theologian, said, the salvation is universal for all the planets of all the cosmos. I don't know. All I know is that love is real, and love is the thing that matters most. And that you get to carry it with you when you die. It's your treasure of your heart, which is what Jesus said. I want to swing back for a moment here to talk about physics. I want to talk about resurrection. I want to talk about soul. To me, the soul is real. It's not magic. It's not made up. It's real in the same way that atoms are real, that quantum bits are real, that the star systems are real. It's my hope in the 21st century that the soul will be seen and measured. We have the capacity now to see the planets and other star systems. We now know that there are qubits. Quantum computers are being built. A qubit it's a thing that's in two places at once. It's here and there at the same time. We know that there's a thing called quantum entanglement, where you can take photons and molecules and entangle them together, and they can communicate across vast different distances, unfailing 100% of the time, and we don't know how. They're linked somehow, another dimension somehow. We now know that the physical structure of the universe is not what we've perceived it to be. I have a hope, and my hope is that in the 21st century, we're going to be able to develop an optical device to see the soul. Because you feel the soul, you feel it, and people talk about, they call it chi, they call it prana, they call it soul, they call it self. There's 100 different names for it, but we all experience it, and we mostly experience it as love. That incredible feeling when you know that you're in the presence of the one that you love and you can't explain why you feel their energy. The soul is the thing that I think in the 21st century, I hope, will allow belief in the soul to go away. We won't have to believe in it anymore because we'll see it as a physical structure, as a real thing, a measurable, scientifically provable, real thing. Could Jesus walk on water? Well, if he was a multidimensional being, why not? The Shaolin priests were said to walk through walls. Could Jesus heal people and bring them back? Why not? If he was a multidimensional being of light. Got no problems with any of that. I think it's important for us to think about the things that we don't know about. So I last left you off with the feeling of peace that I had inside myself that flowed through me. In the book, there's a little story in the beginning that my publisher made me put in at the last minute. And when you read it, you'll understand that it happened in Connecticut. I was a divinity student at the time, and he wanted me to put in something that was a little explained the results of what happens with near-death experience people. In the book, I leave out the most important parts. The man who was with me, Brian, who's in the book as well, came to see me after I had a heart attack in August, and I'll swing back to that in a couple minutes, and how the angel of death visited me again. Brian came to see me after my heart attack, and he said, "Peter, I just read your book. I was there that day with you, and you left out all the good stuff." I said, "Yeah, I did, Brian, because I thought it was too crazy. I didn't want to scare people." So what happened was this. We were coming from a youth retreat that Brian ran for 8th graders. He had recruited me. We had only met a month before, Brian and I. We became instantly best friends. And we were driving down the highway in Waterbury, Connecticut, and I had been in the ski patrol for a long time, as you already know. And so I'd been responding to emergency situations most of my life. I saw a car had just flipped over on the medium strip and was upside down on the railing. I didn't see what had happened. I saw it land. So I started yelling at Brian, "Stop the car, stop the car, stop the car." So Brian didn't see what was going on. He pulled over. He's like, "What's going on?" I said, "Look at that." And by the time I got out of the car and ran across the street, a bunch of softball players had shown up. I remember looking they all had cleats on. And on the medium strip was an old man lying on his back. And a younger man, big brawny guy, stomping around, rah, rah, rah. He'd obviously been in the car as well. I immediately went to him and tried to get him to lie down, but he wouldn't listen to me. He's like, rah, 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 rah. So I went over to the old man, who turned out to be his dad. And his dad's unconscious. He's lying on his back. And I asked, "Is anybody else here in medical profession. Anybody know first aid? And nobody did. I said, I'm taking over the scene. I'm in charge here. Somebody call the ambulance. Off they went to do that. And I palpated this man. And I got to his abdomen, and he was a paunchy fella, but it was like touching rock, which meant he was internally bleeding profusely and quickly. So there was nothing I could do. I couldn't, and nothing else seemed to be broken on him, and I couldn't treat him for shock even, because I didn't want to rush blood out of his essentials here and rush it into his head because he was bleeding. I didn't want to pool up the blood the wrong way, so I didn't know what to do. So I put one hand over his belly and one hand over his forehead, and I began to pray. And as I began to pray, my crown chakra opened up, and like energy came through me, like a bolt of lightning, and charging right through me, and charging right through me, and charging right through me, and it just kept going on. And eventually the ambulance showed up, and that ended, and I told the guys what I knew, and they put me on traction on the injured person's head. So I pulled him in traction. They collared him, and all together we put him on a backboard and strapped him in, and we lifted him up and put him on the gurney, and the gurney was on the other side of the medium strip and on the other side of the guardrails, and they put him in the ambulance. Off they went. I was all done. I go back across the street. I get in the car with Brian. We start to drive down. I start to tell him what had happened. And as we're driving, suddenly I'm racked with pain. My entire internal self is like someone took a chainsaw and stuck it in me and blended me up. And I began writhing in the front seat of his car, screaming in pain, and just like onto his lap almost as he's trying to drive down there, up against the door, and I'm just flopping all over the place, curled up in a ball, and expanding and screaming and yelling and shouting, and he was freaking out. And it was, what's wrong? It was just, I had so much pain. And I opened my eyes, and we were going past a church and on the highway, and I watched the cross leap across and strike me in the chest, and all of my pain went away. And I was exhausted and lying in the car, and I closed my eyes, and inside myself, I am traveling in the infinite darkness again, and I'm going at faster than the speed of light, and far, far in the distance, I could see the light. I opened my eyes, I'm here. I close my eyes, I'm back there. We drive all the way back to New Haven, and we get home. And we go into my kitchen apartment with my wife, who had been married to for 5 months, and who I had told about the near-death experience the day before we got married. And I start to explain this thing to her. This was the time when the hurricane had passed through New Haven and had dropped a tree on my car and smashed all the windows. It was a big branch. It wasn't the whole tree. The tree went that way, but the big branch smashed all my windows, and had a Volkswagen Rabbit, and it filled with water, and I had to bail the car out. But I had to go that week to get the windows replaced at the junkyard. Next day, I go to bed. I get up the next day. It's the day I have to go to the junkyard. Like, my wife says, "So how are you?" I'm like, "I'm okay. I'm all right." I go to the junkyard. I'm in the junkyard with these guys, hate tattooed on their knuckles, and I'm the little white guy with the bow tie on, and I'm standing in line talking to this guy, and this sweet, tingly energy rises up through my feet, makes my knees collapse, fills me right up through and out, and I'm down on the ground. And I'm in some kind of ecstasy, and they're all crowded around me. What the hell's wrong with this guy? And it was like prayer was praying inside me. I was being prayed. I don't know how else to explain it. I didn't make it happen. It was a filling of love And after a little time, they put me up in a chair. And after a little time, it went away. I got my stuff. I, brought it to the guy who's going to fix the car. But for 3 days, that happened again and again and again. And I was at the divinity school, and I couldn't go to class. It was like somebody scrambled up my brain. And my friends, Brian in particular, and our larger friends, began to be very concerned about me. They thought that I was having a nervous breakdown, a psychotic event, because I was just walking everywhere. I was just walking, and then I would be infilled, and I would collapse. And I'd get up and I'd just keep doing. I was skipping class and not going to lunch, and it went on for 3 days. And finally, I was in this class with this professor named Kelsey, Dr. Kelsey, and I was obviously not paying attention. It was 3 days into it. I had skipped a lot of classes, and I had to try to go to class, and so he called on me and he said, Mr. Panagore, answer this question. And in a moment of clarity, I did. I answered the question. I had done the reading the week before. I could answer the question, and then my world, he turned away from me, and it was like my psyche fragmented. It was like my whole self sense became a puzzle that was broken apart and scattered on the floor around me. And I had some kind of psychotic break. I don't know what else to call it. And then it reassembled itself almost instantaneously, and the whole event was over. I then tried to find the old man. I called all the hospitals, but because I wasn't related to him, nobody would tell me anything. That's just the way it goes in the medical world. I don't know what happened to him. I don't know whether he lived or whether he died, and I don't understand what happened to me. All I know is that I felt his pain. I felt his pain. I felt the energy move through me that was not mine to control, and that I was being prayed. And that was the first time I saw the light. I didn't see the light in heaven. I saw it that time. The second time I saw the light was a couple of years later. I had graduated. I got recruited to my first position as an associate interim minister in a swanky town outside New Haven. And I was, my wife and I, at the moment of orgasm, I shot out my forehead and I went into the greater darkness, and I traveled far to the far end. And I saw the light and the darkness, the light of creation and the darkness of creation, pulsating. And at the moment I saw the light, I said inside myself, the light. And I was back in my body again. And my wife said to me, where have you been? You've been gone for 10 minutes. I said, well, this is what happened. I saw the light. Those things being taken out of yourself are my experience of the divine. My non-integration here, my orientation to the other side. Like I said, I had learned meditation in high school. My senior year of religion class, had to take religion class every year. My first year being taught by a lay person, but this lay person was a devotee of the monastery, St. Joseph's Abbey. The abbey had been studying under a man named Sasaki Roshi. Some of you may know that name. Sasaki Roshi had been coming to St. Joseph's Abbey to teach them the practice of meditation, to improve their own practice of contemplation. So they integrated this, and they came up with the practice of centering prayer. Some of you may know that. The prayer of the heart, it's also called. My religion teacher came from a retreat one weekend where he learned this, and he taught it to us, my senior year of high school, 1977, and I took to it immediately. I became a meditator that day. I still meditate every day. When I came back from Montana, I continued my study of mime. My teacher, named Jody Scalise, had studied with Tony Montanaro, who had studied with Marcel Marceau. Marcel Marceau apparently had been a yogi because he had taught Tony Montanaro yoga, who taught Jody Scalise, who taught me. I then began to integrate the two, the practice of meditation and yoga. I'd been studying Wei Chi Ru, which is a Japanese karate form, and I went on to a Korean form called Tong Sudo Muda Kwan, and all having to do with chi practice. And I integrated chi practice into my yoga and my meditation. The practice of, why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this because the access point inside your heart is available to every single person through the practice of meditation. And it doesn't matter whether you're practicing Qigong, or whether you're Seizan and you're painting the mountain, or whether you're the Zen archery master shooting the arrow. It's the practice of the meditation that opens the door to the heart, that allows access to God. And so even though I was running away from God, I realized the only choice I had was to dive in at the same time. So I did both. I ran and I dove. And I dove in through the practice of yoga and meditation together as a way to create inside myself the peaceable place where I could exist and not be torn asunder and consumed. I still practice those things. The door keeps opening and keeps opening and keeps opening over and over again. And it's accessible to everyone. It's not special. It's just practice. If you want God in your life now, belief helps. Practice of prayer helps. Meditation helps. Open the door again and again. Because it doesn't just stay open. You have to keep opening it. They call it the practice of meditation because that's what it is. It's a practice. It's not an achievement. It's an ongoing practice.